Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all very much for joining us today on this important webinar about the Freight Safe programme. It's great to see so many of you joining us. I know it's a really busy time in the industry, so thank you very much for taking the time in your diary. And to those of you who are watching this on YouTube, thank you very much for taking the time to have a look. And for those of you who are joining us in real life, if you need to nip out or you want to share this with colleagues, we will have it up on our YouTube channel probably later today, or if not tomorrow. So please do look back on it. We'll leave it up on there for some time, so you've got that information to hand. There's no topic more important than safety. We know the railways are one of the safest modes of transport for passengers and freight, but we can none of us be complacent. And there are lots of reasons why we need to work together to make rail freight even safer than it is today. Amongst those reasons, of course, are that we're moving into new traffics and new technologies, and the demands of our customers are bigger than ever before. And of course, our staff and our workforce demand that we not only make it the safest possible environment for them within our capabilities, but also that we do so in a way that's productive and cost effective and works for everybody, and also helps to encourage the diversity of our sector, bringing in new people who are attracted to the way we work. And in that way, the work that's been taken forward on safety is overlapping with the work on bringing technology in, and we need to make sure that that works safely and effectively too. So there's absolutely loads to do, lots of ways that we can work together to make the railways a safer and a better place. And so we're really delighted today to bring you this webinar with Geoff Spencer and Tim Shakerley from the Freight Safe programme. I'm sure many of you who've joined us today know Geoff and Tim, if not from this role, from their previous roles in the industry, two of the industry's greats, you might say. Today, Geoff joins us as chair of the Freight Safe programme, and Tim is the lead on the Wagon Condition Programme. And in just a moment, they're going to take us through a series of a presentation about the work that they're doing, the key aspects and priorities that they're working on, and how we can help and support them on that work and get involved. If you've got questions about the presentation, please do ask them. You should find a Q&A function in front of you. Drop your questions in that, or you can drop them into the chat function as well if that is easier, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can at the end. And if you want a copy of today's presentation slides, please just email either Yvonne or myself, and we'll get those over to you after the event's finished. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to Geoff Spencer, the chairman of the Freight Safe programme, who's going to lead us through today's presentation. Geoff, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Maggie. I think Yvonne's now going to put the slides up, and we'll work, myself and Tim will work our way through them. Thank you. Can we just move on to the first slide, please, Yvonne? Thank you. So what is the Freight Safe programme? Well, it's a collaborative health and safety plan designed to facilitate freight growth, protect and enhance the reputation of the freight sector by tackling the network risks where a unified response is essential. And there's a few bits I just want to probably draw out of there and building on what Maggie said as well. So the collaborative piece is really important for us. So we're not duty holders in this process, but we do believe that working together is important and that safety is not a competitive issue for us. So collaborating, sharing information, sharing best practice, sharing resource is a way of protecting and enhancing the reputation of rail freight. And again, why is that important? Well, I can remember some years ago when I was working for DB in Germany, and there was an incident in Italy, Via Reggio, where a propane train had a broken axle and 37 people were killed. Now, people remember the accident, but what they don't remember is the colour of the locomotive or the operator of the locomotive. So what's important is that we work together to protect the reputation and promote the reputation of rail freight to enable us to grow in the future. So nobody wants an accident because it damages everybody. So sticking and working together in that field is really important. And the other part of the programme that's really, really key is the word unified. So where network risk, where a unified response is essential. So each duty operator still has its duty holder has its own responsibilities in managing and promoting and tackling its safety issues. But we work on issues here where we've got a unified response. So, if I look at Freightliner, they have a heavy road haulage fleet. We don't look at road haulage risk because that's particularly with one operator. Nuclear traffic is predominantly with DRS. So we don't look at nuclear traffic because that's just with one operator. We're looking across the field where everybody can contribute and work together on that unified approach to the risks that we face. Can we just move on to the next slide, please? So it's a jointly funded and supported initiative. So the the Freight Safe programme is defined, resourced and jointly funded by duty holders, so the FOX and Network Rail. We've got some funding from FSP, which is the Freight Safety Improvement Portfolio, which is a pot of money that Network Rail hold on with the aims of reducing network risk. And we've got, as I mentioned, we've got joint funding in there from the FOX and also from Network Rail. We do joint funding on some of the programmes between the duty holders and FSP. We've got some that are just purely FSP funded, and we've got some that are purely FOC funded. So we've got different models in this, but what is key, I guess, in what I'm saying is that everybody's got some skin in the game here and everybody's supporting it. And a really important part of that programme is where some of the issues are FSP funded is that we've got commitments from the FOX and from Network Rail that will get the right resource to enable us to get the implementation within the industry. It's heavily supported by the Rail Safety and Standards Board. So that they've signed the charter, which I'll come on to in a second. And it's also endorsed by ORR. And each of the groups that we have in the freight hierarchy, so from RFOG through NFSG, those are probably some we've heard of, up to the Freight Safe Steering Group, all of us now have an ORR inspector that sits on there as an observer. And it's been it's quite a mature relationship, so we get some challenge from that. But it also helps us to understand their thinking as well and whether we're on the right track with some of the issues that we're addressing. Could we move on to the next slide, please? So the Rail Freight Collaboration Charter, we've had a charter in the past when we were National Freight Safety Group Steering Group. This is a revised charter. It's signed by all the freight operating companies. You can see the signatories at the bottom there by Network Rail and RSSB. And it sets out our vision, the scope of the programme that we have, and facilitating the necessary funding and resource commitments. And I would underpin there the resource commitment is really key to the delivery of the projects. We can have the best funding we've got, we can put the best structures in, but really need the resource commitments to enable us to get that into the businesses to make the differences. And Tim will talk a little bit about that as we get further through the presentation. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Yvonne. So core principles for freight safety vision, we didn't have these in our previous structure, and they seem obvious when you look at them. But I guess it's one of the parts of the lessons learned that we found when we went through the review, is we've really brought in structured governance now. So we had some forms of governance, if you like, through charts, but we've got much better tiered accountability for the overall delivery of the programme now. And I'll come on to that a little bit later on. The collaborative safety leadership, well, it goes without saying that we need that. That's been pretty good in the past, but I've seen a step change improvement since we started with the Freight Safe programme, particularly from the FOX and from Network Rail, with the commitment to that and right up to the CEO and MD levels that we've probably not always seen in the past. So that's a great step forward for us. And we've got prioritised and deliverable projects. So we're absolutely clear about what we're working on, and that they are deliverable. They're not just some sort of pipe dream that we've plucked out the air to try and tackle, and it'll take us 20 years to do that. Could we move on to the next slide, please? So the Freight Safe programme journey, I think it's probably from a context, Maggie set the context great before we started the presentation. So where did we come from and how did we get here? If you go back into control period 6, we had the Freight Integrated Plan for Safety. So that sat with NFSG. In 2017, we did a major review of that plan, and that was the last one that we did where we had our top 5 priorities, and those have previously been shared. We decided as we went through into last year that it was time we did a thorough review of our risk profiling, because we'd not done that for a good while. And we commissioned a risk review and a governance review and also a deliverability review. So in the past, rather than just looking at the risks, we wanted to go, if we started from scratch now, what structures would we need in place to deliver this? And that started with the risk review. We also said to deliver this, we've got certain group structures in place now. Do we need those? And everything was sort of on the table to be changed if we needed that to happen. And we commissioned that. We brought somebody independent to that. We brought Professor George Bearfield in to lead that for us. And that, again, was a jointly funded effort through FSP and also funded by the Fox themselves and Network Rail. So everybody contributed towards the cost of that review. It was a really decent and thorough review, heavily supported by RSSB. Thanks to the colleagues there for working on that with us. And out of that, we developed the Freight Safe programme, which we'll come on to in a moment and talk more about. We then developed the signing of a rail freight freight collaboration charter. So that was really about gaining the commitment from the Fox and the Network Rail and the RSSB and the other key stakeholders into, it's all right, we've looked at something, we've identified where we are, we've decided what we want to do, we've tested with the deliverability review that it can be delivered. Now we need the commitment to do that. So all that went on from pretty much from September last year. So it's quite it's a thorough review, but it's been done in a very timely manner. And that brings us into CP7, where we've kicked off the Freight Safe programme. So you'll see we've now got different branding for it. We've got different people that sit on the steering groups. We're looking at the governance of groups above, which I'll come on to in a moment. But it's really now hitting the floor running, which is why we're here today to talk about it. So if we could move on to the next chart, please. So within the activities of the programme, we've got National Freight Safety Group, which you can see on the left. The National Freight Safety Group has been there for a good number of years. One of the outputs was the review was we shouldn't change National Freight Safety Group. We should keep it there, and we should keep it working on activities that are important on addressing sort of business as usual activities, so fatigue, health and well-being, overspeeding, blanket emergency speed restrictions, common safe system of work, SPADs, and sector representation. So we should keep all those activities, we could keep those plates spinning on those sticks. At the same time, we identified that there were 4 key outputs from the Freight Safe programme, from the review. There was a Wagon Condition Programme, which Tim leads for, and Tim will talk about in a moment. There's Freight Safe Insights, there's Horizon Scanning, and there's Climate Change. And we manage those projects through a project management office. It sounds very grand, but it's basically one person we've got leading those for us. So we've got far more structure, understanding of the projects, key milestones, outputs, how we fund it, where the resource commitment sits in. That's far more visible to us now, where some of the weaknesses are. And we manage those through the accountability reviews at the Freight Safe Steering Group. And again, we'll see a little bit later where that fits into the hierarchy. So that's our programme of activity and how the two fit together. And also we've got obviously moving between the PMO and NFSG. We've got that sort of iterative process going around to do the checks and the reviews that we're actually delivering against all our promises. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So on the priority projects, interestingly, from the review, we didn't just come up with 4 issues that we face, so 4 strategic risks that we face, the sort of operational risks. It identified some other key challenges for us. So the first one was, and this was no surprise because it was our #1 risk before, is that freight vehicles are entering the network in an unfit condition. Now, we have to put that into context, and I'm sure Tim will do that later on, is that, by and large, and most of the time, our services are extremely safe, but we have an opportunity to make that better. And I'll let Tim talk about that a bit later on. So the priority project that's been developed from that, we did have the condition of freight vehicles on the network project, and that's now the Wagon Condition Programme, which is a massive leap forward from where we've been with CFVN in the past. We realised that we'd no shared evidence and risk-based understanding of emerging risks and potential safety hazards. So one of One of the objectives we set, George, when we were doing the review, start looking ahead for the next 5 years and tell us what some of the stuff that's going to come up that we're facing is. And actually, when we did that review, we'd no evidence of what that might be or no common approach to how that might work. So the priority of the project that came out of that one, which has been led by RSSB, is horizon scanning. So we get a better understanding of some of the stuff that we're going to face going forward in future. The third one, we got no shared evidence and risk-based understanding of current risks, risk acceptance criteria, and the impact of safety strategies. Now, that might sound bizarre, actually, when you look at that and thinking, within the safety governance that we have within the rail industry, how can that be? But whilst we're very good as individual duty holders at understanding what that is, and at RSSB, we have the data that sits in SMIS, which is generally all on-network data, there's lots of other information out there that can help us to better understand what those risks are. We need to have a debate about what our risk acceptance criteria are and also what the impact of the safety strategies might be in future. So part of that was developing a freight precursor indicator model, which we now title as a freight safe insights model. That's heavily worked between the groups and RSSB. And again, Tim will cover that later on. And the final one was the freight sector doesn't have a shared understanding of the practical real world impacts of climate change on its safety risk. And that's not the climate change risks that affect us at sort of network level, because we know Network Rail are doing a lot of work on that, so again, through RSSB, and sort of the impact on the network infrastructure. It's things that so what does heat do to drivers at work? What does wet weather do if you're trying to shunt trains? What does it do when, how it's impacting how you get from A to B in road vehicles and so on, and what might that work? So we've got a piece of work that we've kicked off, or we're out to kick off, on consolidating the freight sector's understanding of the safety impacts of climate change, extreme weather, to enhance our risk management. So that's generally looking at the impact on it as ourselves, as operators, rather than the wider network. We go forward one slide, please. So the structured governance, as I said early on, I think this is a real key and important piece for us to make sure, it happens. It'll hold me to account as the chair of the Freight Safe Steering Group, and as we go through all the groups, all the various members to account. We did a review that said we need to look at having the right people in the right groups. So at the Freight Safe Steering Group, we wanted to make sure we've got people there that could speak for the companies and for the industries that they represent, the parts of the industry that we represent. So we've got 3 FOCs that sit there. We've got DB, GBRF, and Freightliner, and each of those buddies up with other FOCs. So there's always a way of getting information in there or challenges into us through that. We've got Network Rail sits on there. We've got the ORR sit on there as an observer. We've got RSSB in there. We've got somebody from FSP sits on it, so from the Freight Safety Improvement Portfolio sits on it to understand what are some of the bigger risks that we face. So how should we best spend the FSIP funding to address those risks? We've got a comms strategy now, so we've got a comms person sits on there with us. And also we've got a wellbeing lead that sits in there, plus the chair, plus Doug Gill as the chair of NFSG. So quite a broad group in there now. We just had our second meeting of the new structure. The governance at the moment is through the Rail Partners Freight Council. So that's got the 5, I call them the 5 biggest FOCs that sit on there. And that's our governance line at the moment. It was our DG Freight Group. There is a review of that going on to see whether we can get some governance across a wider group of stakeholders. So it would be all FOCs and Network Rail. And there's a review going on with Network Rail as to about the structure of that meeting and the frequency, which I think would be a good step forward, having everybody there for that. The Freight Safe programme we're talking about now is governed by the steering group. The National Freight Safety Group and the PMO sit below that. And the PMO does sit on the steering group as well. I should have mentioned that. Philip Hassel sits on that. And then we've got Rail Freight Operations Group and other partners sit below there. So I think the other key thing for us to mention is this supports the collaborative delivery and our contribution to RHSS. There's lots of acronyms in there today, but the new rail industry health and safety strategy, what was leading health and safety on Britain's railways. So this is our link into making sure that we collectively sign up to that and that we work to show to our SSP and to the industry that we're working collaborative to make sure that we deliver that strategic risk or the strategic risks that are in there that impact freight. Thank you. We'll just go on to the next slide, please. I'll now hand over to Tim. Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Geoff, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Geoff said, I'm going to just walk you through the 4 priority projects to give you an idea of the types of thing that we're approaching. And I'm going to kick off with the Wagon Condition Programme, which is the programme that I'm leading. So this is not, I'm going to make 2 opening statements here. One is that this is not new. Condition of freight vehicles on the rail network has been a programme that has been in play for 2 or 3 years now. And we have re-energised it and pushed it on a little bit. But I think the second big broad statement is to say, this is not to say that the risks of our freight vehicles are poor. Geoff said it, rail freight is inherently safe, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for us to make it better, to improve our reputation. And the Condition of Freight Vehicles project, as it was envisaged 2 or 3 years ago, was in recognition that there were too many instances of freight vehicles impacting performance on the network. And it was receiving a lot of focus, and rightly so, because there were too many issues going on. The programme instigated and looked at 3 points. Firstly, around yards and sidings. How do we allow trains to come onto the network, and are we providing suitable environments for those? And what are the human factors for preparing those trains? And secondarily, what is going on with the maintenance of trains and freight wagons, and how they're then presented to the network, and is that robust? Geoff alluded to the lessons that were learned, and I think the CFVN project made significant progress, but it didn't really have the right clear goals and objectives, and didn't have the structured governance that we alluded to and wanted to. And importantly, it hadn't engaged all of the actors who act in the freight industry, and particularly associated with their entities in charge of maintenance. And to run a programme that looks at the condition of freight vehicles on the network without engaging with the ECMs is a bit of a fatal flaw. And then the final piece was about maintenance tasks that was going on, and it had little focus. So the attempt of the Wagon Condition Programme is to learn from those opportunities and try and drive us forward. And it has been launched to address these points, but build on all that good work done by Condition of Freight Vehicles. And if we were going to describe the Wagon Condition Programme success measures, I think it would be the 3 that are on the list. So it is about saying that the condition of freight vehicles on the network should not be our primary focus when it comes to rail freight safety. And the sector would clearly demonstrate continuous improvement in safe performance, which is contributing to the opportunity for market growth. So we are not suggesting that we're going to be in a place where there are no more freight vehicle incidents on the network. That's an unrealistic goal. But we can make a substantial difference and continue to improve the safety performance of wagons on the network. And the second piece there, really to quantify that, is to say that the condition of freight vehicles on the network is considered as low as reasonably practical in risk terms, and that we are able to quantify the risk of the impact and then target our actions so that there is a rhythm of continuous progress and improvement in reducing the risk of freight vehicles on the network. So it's small, consistent, practical steps that improve the condition of freight vehicles on the network. We could go to the next slide, please, Yvonne. So I'm going to take you through how we're approaching the Wagon Condition Programme and what we're trying to achieve. And there are 7 key issues associated in terms of plans that we are going to try and do. And an 8th one, which is about communicating and engagement. So the first and foremost step of the Wagon Condition Programme is to understand the risk. What risk are wagons presenting to the network as it currently stands, and what level of additional intervention do we require in order to make wagon condition as low as reasonably practical, or the risks associated with the wagon condition as low as reasonably practicable. The second piece is about clarifying some points of law. So there are a lot of European regulation, and indeed ROGs, that was interpreted from European legislation about the roles of ECMs and how they should interact with railway undertakings. But there are, in some places, some lack of clarity in those areas. So the attempt is, rather than wait for a legislative change that improves that clarity, is for the industry to collaborate and get together and figure out how to manage these risks better. How do we divide up our responsibilities in an amicable way and make sure there is no opportunity for risks to fall between the gaps? The third piece is about defining appropriate guidance in maintenance management. So we believe that we do fundamentally a good job of maintaining our wagons, but there is room for improvement, and not every maintenance process, practice, and procedure is as good as its neighbour. So in the interests of collaboration, how do we share best practice, and how do we provide the right guidance of interpretation of the ECM regulations so that we can construct a good framework for maintenance management? And then the fourth piece is that fundamentally wagon maintenance has not substantially evolved for the last 30 or 40 years. It is pre-planned intervention based on schedules. And technology has moved on massively in the last time and space. And there are opportunities to deploy technology, both line side with Network Rail's implementation of impact load detectors and hot box detectors and other potentially great technology, plus also what we might be able to do onboard in terms of remote condition monitoring of wagons. But how do we get the most out of that technology and start to consider and how we unwind much of those or exploit much of that technology in a proactive maintenance environment? We could go to the next slide, please, Ron. So then the fifth piece is about a framework for an interactive process to ensure compatibility with train preparation and maintenance specification. So this is a classic place where there is a divide of responsibility between railway undertakings and entities in charge of maintenance. Where do we draw those lines? How do we make sure that we have a train preparation standard and a process where trains are inspected onto the network that ECMs can rely on and design their maintenance processes around? But equally, how do we make sure that the railway undertaking has a good understanding? So, and how do we create an environment where there is a common standard so that when you go into a yard and side and you're looking at a particular wagon, those people that do inspections for a multitude of FOCs don't have to keep referring to a standard to work out what they're supposed to do at which particular time. The sixth part is about communicating and engaging, because that again was a lesson learned from CFVN, that wasn't as strong as it might have been, and therefore coming out, telling people how we're doing, what we're doing, and put the right focus, priority, and progress reporting into industry is a key facet of the programme. We need to develop time, tools, competence, capacity, and facilities to understand, articulate good, better, best. What does that mean? Well, that means that our risk profile of freight operations is not the same. The risks of an aggregate train running in a rural part of unpopulated part of the country is not the same risks as a high consequence dangerous goods train running through London. And consequently, it is entirely appropriate that the risk prevention measures and the facilities and environment that we maintain our wagons is different. And those standards are entirely appropriate in an economic railway where we're always under pressure. So matching the standards about which we apply to the risks that are inherent in the operation of the train can provide an optimal solution for an approach for maintenance of wagons. And then the final piece is about understanding, because adhesion has always been considered a problem for freight in terms of lifting a train and lifting it from start in inclement weather, and it's never really been considered as a problem associated with braking. And what recent events and some of the high profile incidents that have happened in the last 2 to 3 years have highlighted is maybe that's not the case. And maybe there is a piece of understanding that we need to do and move industry knowledge on to understand what happens on adhesion for freight trains. So this is about creating a system of controls across vehicles and infrastructure that can help us manage problems of low adhesion, and creating an environment where suitable precautions can be put in place. We could go to the next slide, please, Tom. And I apologise for how busy this slide is, but this really sets out the Wagon Condition Programme in one simple slide. As Geoff alluded to, this is all about governance, and the first 2 lines of the Freight Safe Programme and the Wagon Condition Programme is being supervised by the Freight Safe Programme Steering Group and the Wagon Condition Board. And there are 5 key work streams of work associated with the Wagon Condition Programme. The first is around maintenance and entity of charge and maintenance definition. How do we maintain? How do we provide the right guidance? How do we create the right environment for people to succeed in applying maintenance techniques? But also, how do we then deploy technology and bring all those things together to advance our maintenance processes and procedures? So all about the engineering of wagons, be that design, operation and maintenance. The second work stream is about train preparation and planning. How do we create the environment for our frontline ground staff to prepare trains properly, give them the opportunity and time to plan those trains properly, give them the facilities in order to achieve successful exam, and create the right environment so we have the best chance of presenting a train that is fit for service back into the network. And if there are issues to find, they're found appropriately before the train enters the network and poses a risk. The third work stream is the adhesion piece, and that is really about new understanding and learning and doing research to try and understand those processes. I'll come to the fourth work stream in a moment. The fifth work stream is about clarifying the law and defining and segregating the duties that will inform the other work streams about how we should interpret as best practice how to apply those guidance. And the fourth work stream is really important, and that is about quantifying the risk, because that should help us determine how safe is safe enough and how much work do we have to do in this space to improve our environment. It will also equally focus and prioritize each of those work streams so that we can deploy our scarce industry resources to the right areas of this problem and get the best benefit and as fast as we can in the right areas for risk. The programme is not new. Everything in blue are work streams that already exist. Only the areas in orange are where we've identified gaps and we think we need new programmes in order to manage those risks. And the hashed lines is where we are simply just adjusting existing remits and recommendations to make sure there is alignment. The idea is that we are only doing things once, we are adopting industry practice where it's happening, and we're not creating new work streams. And we are making sure there is clear governance, clear remits to get the right outcomes. So that really talks about the Wagon Condition Programme. If we could move on another slide, please, Yvonne. I'll just now touch on the other 3 priority projects. And as Geoff said, these are not all the projects we could have assumed. They're the ones where we believe there is maximum benefit in terms under the major risk review that can be delivered through a collaboration. So if we talk about Freight Safe data insights, this is really about developing metrics or sets of metrics to give understanding and breakdown of our risks and the new challenges and new risks that are evolving over time. And it is absolutely about building data ecosystems for the sector to provide it with the necessary safety insights. So Geoff alluded to some of the institutional processes, and all duty holders have their own independent systems. But this is about how do we learn from each other and not use data as a weapon, but actually use it as an informer and enabler so that we can identify good practice, identify areas for improvement, and learn from each other are about improving the whole safety. So the industry is generally very data rich, but it is a little bit uncoordinated. And clearly data in our commercial environment can be seen as commercially sensitive. And it has the potential to be used inappropriately and to gain commercial advantage. So the Freight Safe Insights project is actually about trying to take that away and make sure that it is only about how people can then use their own data and their own sources and compare against industry standards to work out if there are better ways of doing things. It is designed to link into current industry sources, and there's a lot of effort going on to make sure that individual duty holder systems talk seamlessly to a central repository in the artificial intelligence analytics. So we avoid duplication, avoid having to the huge administrative burden. And it's much more tailored than SMIS historically has to be freight operations. So the information is useful and the data going in is valuable. That then goes into a data warehouse that aggregates on an industry level and starts to create intelligence to allow us to make decisions. So it is that commercially sensitive benchmarking. It is an ability to compare how you are against the reporting. It is about building your own self-service dashboard so that you can track the things that you're particularly interested in. And it is creating the opportunity for customers to create intelligence about the safety performance that they have, and plugging into standard business intelligence capability models so that they can become part of any individual duty holders and businesses' usual safety dashboards. And importantly, it is about using this to support better decisions. And it's things like, for example, using impact load information to improve the way that we maintain wheel sets. It is creating the freight precursor indicator model. What are the trends that are going against us and might need attention, and providing that dashboard in terms of a precursor indicator model to provide better data, and indeed provide the right maintenance indicators to allow us to intervene and attack maintenance issues before they become a fundamental problem. So that's really Freight Safe data insights, gathering data and creating the right environment. If we can move on to the next one, please, Yvonne. So the third priority project is about that horizon scanning that Geoff introduced earlier. So industry is naturally head down at the moment in day-to-day problems, running their businesses, recognizing the tough commercial environment. And that means that looking forward and looking at what's coming on the horizon is still very reactionary and often in response to new or emerging challenges or crises. And actually getting that early sight and getting insight as to what is important and what might help us and see what's coming may enable us to be more efficient in dealing with those issues as they come. So RSSB has a future lab, and it's that team that is leading the work on this and pushing the horizon scanning service into the sector and doing the research. So the first part of this, sort of blocks 1, 2, and 3, is about looking at the types of things that we might want to gather, what types of information are important in terms of safety horizons and what we might need to pick up, and then evaluating how you associate them with emerging risks and develop a scanning approach to actually pick those up. And then it's about going into test mode, going back to our engagement, validating what we're doing, figuring out if we're creating the right information, and pushing that back into the industry so that they get feed. And that then maps then to the high-level delivery plan, where we validated and found the right data that is going to interest industry, that the information is provided timely in a way that people can absorb, and that this tool is a tool to identify what might happen in terms of safety, things that might happen that influence safety becomes part of business as usual going forward. And that then defines a horizon scanning project that becomes business as usual going forward and a tool for duty holders to use. And then the final project, if we can move on a slide, Yvonne, is associated with climate change. And as Geoff said, this isn't about carbon reduction, and this isn't about how climate change impacts the wider rail infrastructure network. There are other duty holders dealing with this. This is specifically about the risks that might impact freight safety. So this project is very much in its infancy, but it is starting to look at how extreme weather may impact the future operation of sites. So it is a multiple user sites, where in yards and sidings, what happens when yards and sidings have the potential to flood? How do we communicate amongst the duty holders? How do we create the right responses to impacts to climate change to keep our people safe and our rail freight running? Geoff alluded to what happens in terms of locomotive caps. So it is about the effects of heat. It is about the effects of potentially humidity or adverse weather. What might disruption do to fatigue? How does that influence the work that we're doing on fatigue? It's those sorts of things about in locomotive cap risks associated with climate change that we need to look at for risk management purposes. And then obviously for specific projects, what's the impact of high winds in a intermodal container terminal? What happens if we have a higher percentage of freezing days, so frozen product sits in wagons? How might we respond, and how might we improve the unloading process? And what happens in extreme weather? Do we need to protect some of our dry goods and sand and things like that to make sure it still can discharge successfully at destination? And what changes might we need to make? So it's trying to get an understanding of those impacts and those safety impacts to enhance the risk management and make sure our deliverability continues to improve. So I think that does my deep dive through the 4 priority projects. And at that point, we go on to the next slide and hand over to Geoff just to conclude. Geoff, you're on mute.
Thank you, Tim. Another £5 in the jar. So, yeah, thanks for that, Tim. So I don't like the word hope, but I do hope you got a sense for the depth that we've gone into in this review and the structure of the work we've got going forward for the future. It's a real game changer from what we've done in the past and the lessons that we learned as we went through that. And I've been able to attract the likes of Tim to come and lead some of one of the work streams for us, and people we've got leading the others as well. Having those independents doing that's a real game changer, as well as making sure that we've got key sponsors as well from the Freight Safe Steering Group of each of these projects. So whilst we've got Tim leading the project, we've got David Golding from GBRF as the sponsor that sits on the steering group for the Wagon Condition project. So there's far more link back into the Fox than we've had in the past as well. And I think that's all I've got to say now. I think we can just move over to Maggie for questions, please, if there are any. Oh, well, I will say thanks for your time this afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to join us, because I know you're all exceptionally busy. And if you have any questions after the meeting, please feel free to contact myself or Tim or anybody else in the steering group.
Geoff, thank you. And Tim, thank you very much. That was really, really good and insightful. Geoff, just before we go to questions, just going back to your NFSG work streams, do you just want to give us like one sentence on what's going on in that space?
Yes, I can do. So they're things that we've been working. I'll go back to my slide. So yeah, fatigue is one of them within there. So I guess any of the lower level risks are dealt with in there in that collaborative space. So we've got fatigue in there. We've got health and well-being, common safe systems of work, how we work together to share them. That's the program that we kicked off. It's not quite got to where we wanted it to be, but we're making a few changes to the program leads in there. We've got SPADs, and they're looking at sort of emerging risks as well, and anything else that might be popping up within there, and then giving us the assurance through the steering group of how are those been managed. They also manage RFOG, which is a Rail Freight Operations Group. So they're like the doing group that will go away and look at, do we need to change rules or standards or ways of working? And I think one of the other key changes that we've had in the past, Maggie, is we're now looking at privatisation separated everybody, and everybody went away and designed their own way of doing things. So as you know, Neil Simon always reminds me, you know, there are several ways to do brake tests, which can't be good, can it, when we're operating the same trains on the network? So I think we've gone through that maturity circle, and we're now coming back at how could we get to more standardization in some of the ways we improve, you know, that we work in yards that aren't a competitive issue. So we've got people doing it in the same way, because we have lots of traffic now where you could have one company's loco, somebody else's wagon, somebody else's driver, and somebody else preparing it. You know, and it's operating under a particular duty holder. So how can we do more standardization and simplify that and reduce risk in that event?
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. And I think, you know, we'll take some questions from the floor as well, but certainly for some of the wider sector, the end users, you know, who aren't formally always on a Freight Safe programme, some best practice sharing perhaps from some of the learning on that might be something really interesting to explore, particularly around those areas that are really pertinent beyond just rail freight operations. So common safe system of work, health and well-being, programs like that, where you've developed some really good learning that actually might have application to other people as well. So perhaps an action back to have a think about how we can help you share that.
Yeah, and I think we tried that in the past, and I don't think we delivered collectively. I don't think we delivered that successfully with, you know, what we used to call the Freight End User Forum. It felt like it fizzled out a little bit to me, and I think that, you know, there's absolutely a need in how we link up that work and that thinking, and we get the lessons learned from both parties in that. And there is not an intent to go away and do something on our own as operators and not involve everybody else. But what, of course, is important is that the operators do manage the risks that they're facing, and hence the unified risk approach that I talked about right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely, Geoff. And you know, I'm thinking more that you've done some good work, and you know, usually when people come and say, "But this is what we've learned about health and well-being or fatigue management," it sparks a thought for somebody in their business as well. And you know, we should really maximise the value that we get from the work that you've done.
Yeah, and we are trying to set, you know, so we you know, you'll see this is branded now. So I should have said we've got a LinkedIn page with the Freight Safe programme. So please feel free to go on there, have a look, join as a follower. We want to get better at communicating. We want to get out more talking about it than we've probably done in the past. You know, so coming on here today, we're at the Freight End User Forum that's, I think, sponsored by Victor Rail on the 15th of May. You know, myself and Tim are there to present again and to get involved in talking. We'll come out and meet you and talk to you. So, you know, the stakeholder piece is really important to us, and we put far more time and effort into making sure that we do that in future, and we're structured to do that in the future.
And a shameless plug for the 28th of May, which is the Wagon Condition Programme launch and engagement day in the afternoon at RSSB, and we would welcome wide participation to really do even a deeper dive on what we've just done on Wagon Condition Programme.
If you send us the details, Tim, we can happily put that out to members.
Thanks, Maggie, I will.
Right, a question on the Q&A from Liz Parks. She says, have you got a couple of examples of use of on and off vehicle technology? She's particularly interested in remote vehicle monitoring. Tim, perhaps to you.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. Yes, there are somewhere in the region of 5 or 6 different trial solutions for onboard technology in terms of wagon condition monitoring. So VTG have a product called iWagon, and that is using a Norbremse system that potentially measures brake pressures, wheel rotation, hotbox, etc., and provides a platform that enables you to bolt on all sorts of monitoring devices. Network Rail sponsored a technological development, which is a wired type system that again is looking at indicating to the driver when they get a lock wheels. So an intelligent wagon that looks at that program. There are a number of other technological schemes that are on board that are looking at those sorts of solutions from a wagon integrity and wagon safety perspective. When you couple that with some of the work that Network Rail's doing, so there is a lot of work going on in thermal imaging, for example, that can not just pick up hot boxes, but can also pick up things like dragging brakes. It can pick up wheels that are locked and actually pick up the heat generated from sparks as wheels remain locked. So all good positive indicators. And if you can start to link that to wild data, which starts to build a picture of impact loads as wheels and how they grow, and link that to RFID and pin it to a wheel set, you can actually start to plot wheel degradation and therefore make an intervention really early. So the technology piece is about joining all of those individual work streams into a cohesive plan, creating a common data platform so that any fog towing anybody's wagon under any technology piece can link all of the pieces of the jigsaw together and create a picture, and then put in the right protection protocols so that only the right people can see the data at the right time, so that confidentiality is protected. You start to create something that has huge potential. And that's what the technology work stream for the Wagon Condition Programme is thinking about, and building on some of the work that Maggie's been thinking about with data insights as to how do we create a platform that doesn't just look at safety, but has the same platform to spread across other as yet unidentified commercial opportunities for wagon data.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I am unreasonably excited actually about the potential of technology on wagons. It's the emerging results from the trials that are underway in the safety space are fantastic, but also, once you've got the power on the wagon, the transmitter on the wagon, and the data protocols in place, the sort of the customer information that can come from that, the interface with programs like ECTS, where there are, real concerns that, we may make matters worse if we don't have the right data. Anything and everything, customer information, the profile of rail freight, there's huge ambition. So I think my challenge is making sure that I don't stretch Tim's remit too far, that he gets annoyed with me, but that equally that we don't let the very necessary focus on safety limit the ambitions for doing other things as well. So it's fabulous, great progress. Question about sharing contact details. Yes, we'll pick that up offline with you, Rupert. So thank you very much. Unless there's any more questions coming in, just a final one from me then. How do you know you've got the right risks, Geoff? How can you be certain we're not missing something?
Well, because of the review we did last year using George, so I at that time, with the information we had, we've come up with a program that we've got, and it was for those that were involved, we had a whole mix of stakeholders involved in that process, using the best data that we had, and I am confident, as we've been through that process, that we've got the best risks, or we're managing the right risks. What we're also doing though is NFSG is working on stuff. We've got the 4 out of here. It's also important to say that we are looking at emerging risks all the time. So we're not just saying, oh, it's these and forget everything else. If something crops up or something emerges, then absolutely we will hook up onto that and have a look and tackle that if we need to do. What I am confident of though is, and Tim's gone through this in great detail, is that the data insights piece and the PIM will give us even greater assurance in the future of where those risks are, without having to go through this real clunky manual process, by using people with really big brains to help us through that. We'll be data led in future to enable us to get to that position, and we will continue to take as many inputs as we can through that process. So I am confident. There's a lot of people kick the tires of it. ORR have endorsed it. So yes, I'm really confident we're working on the right things.
If I could just add, I came in after that work had been done, and there's another piece, Maggie, which is that there's actually a long list of risks after the 4 that we're looking at. They just didn't make the cut. So there is a comprehensive suite of work that we can do once we've cracked the 4 priority projects. And let's be clear, we need to focus and prioritize in order to make sure we exercise and deliver and get industry some outputs. And we've only focused on the ones where collaboration has a real value. There are other risks that are being managed by other sectors, including NFSG, that are equally important, but they are already either established or don't necessarily benefit in the same way by collaboration. So it's a portfolio of risk that we're managing, and it's a subset that Freight Safe Programme is focused on.
Yeah, thank you, understood. Lovely. Okay, well, we have no more questions coming in. so it just really falls to me to thank both of you for your time. Oh, we do time today. A comment from Simon Blake. Looking forward to the 15th, which is the Freight End User Day that you mentioned, Tim, so we can identify how end user risks and solutions can be imported into the rail freight industry Freight Safe programme. Currently can't see where this is. So maybe one to pick up, I think, on the 15th with you both there, and definitely worth making sure that we're doing everything we can to get that alignment to be as strong as it can be, particularly for customers like Simon who operate their own wagons and terminals as well. But I think we know that one's on the agenda for that follow-up session. Okay, in which case it does now finally come to me to wrap us up for today. We are right on time. Thank you both very much for your thoughts. I suspect this will not be the last time that we'll hear from both of you on an event like this. And please take an open invitation as work progresses to use our networks to share the emerging findings or areas where you would value extra input. We're always here to help on that. Thank you to all of those of you who've joined today. As I said, if you want a copy of the slides, just drop us an email and we'll get those over to you, and it will be up on our YouTube channel later today. But the only other thing to say, I think, is after the Freight End User Day, we've got our summer barbecue somewhere in the wilds of the Cheshire, the Welsh borders. So if after a day talking safety, you are in need of a sausage or a burger, please do book for that. It is open for bookings and remains so up until the day. So please do come along if you fancy it. Thank you all very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Anonymous attendee who wants the slides, I don't know who you are, so if you could just drop me an email, that would be fabulous, or let me know who you are before we close. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see you all again soon.
Thank you.